Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. I rise in opposition of this bill, and I like to bring a few different perspectives to the conversation. I am a small business owner. I have a business in Minneapolis, so this directly affects my livelihood outside of this part-time job here with you all. I'm also a former corporate attorney from a Minneapolis-based company, and I actually dealt with these issues on an everyday basis when I worked there. And I'm also a mother. So, and last but not least, that's another issue that's really relevant because, again, we're talking about Unified State Labor Standards Act when we're talking about how we're going to impact people's lives. And the real discussion we should be having here today, instead of preempting a discussion, is about the issues that we're trying to preempt. Paid family leave, minimum wage discussion. These are issues that we as state lawmakers should be debating in depth, and when we are going to make a decision that it's going to affect all Minnesotans, we should take that very seriously. We're in essence punting, in essence not doing our job by saying we're not going to deal with it. We're not going to deal with it, and by the way, we're not going to let our state local governments deal with it either. So I really want you members to really think through before you vote to support this measure. I'm all for business. I'm trying to make it happen too and have a good business in Minneapolis. So I understand exactly how the Minneapolis ordinance would affect my business, or to the extent it does, and how a St. Paul ordinance would affect my business, because I also worked again with a nationwide company who had to deal with the patchwork. So I get the argument. It is a burden. It will be a burden for me. And as a lawyer, I can argue both ways. So let's talk about that. What is the argument for preemption? So like I mentioned, you know, we could have, it could be a higher cost to have business in Minneapolis versus a Richfield. That's a given because you would have to have a higher minimum wage in Minneapolis. But at the same time, it costs more to live in Minneapolis. So there is a rationale why those elected officials at the local level are pushing for this, and they should be held accountable as we are at the state level. What else is an argument for preemption? Uniformity. As a business owner, I want to make sure that I don't have to worry about borders and lines, and I just want to run my business. Let me tell you, I spend many hours on the phone talking to the bank and talking to regulators all the time when I run my small business. So I would like less of it too. But at the same time, you know, we already deal with this. We already have a federal government, we already have a state government, and we are already dealing with the minutia at the local level. So to say that businesses can't handle this, some might have a harder time. A larger business will have an easier time because more likely they'll have a department that will deal with it. In my business, I'm the HR department, I'm the treasurer department, I'm the government affairs department, I'm all of it. So I'm constantly juggling all these mandates, and I really, frankly, would like to spend more time growing my business. So I get it. But why am I against this bill? I'm against this bill because I believe in the voices of the people, and I believe when I represent my district, I'm putting my district first and foremost versus my personal interest. In this case, I received a resolution from the city of Minnetonka, which is one of the cities that I represent, and I hope you have that handout. If not, you will have it momentarily. And in it, you will see one of the resolutions that not just Minnetonka, but also 30 other cities across our wonderful state have passed, basically in support for local decision-making and the ability of local elected officials to directly respond to the needs of their community. As of this week, the 19th of this week of April, 30 resolutions passed. And members, if I list a name of a city that you represent, please note and please take note that you are voting against your city's interest. Baudette, Buffalo, Cambridge, Carver, Eagan, Ely, Iota, Franklin, Hawley, Hopkins, Isanti, Lucan, Medford, Minneapolis, Minnetonka, Mora, North St. Paul, Northfield, Olivia, Owatonna, Prior Lake, Richfield, Rochester, Springfield, St. Paul, Wabasso, Warren, Watkins, Wacon, and White Bear Lake have all passed resolutions telling them, state, back off. We have jurisdiction here. And I think we should listen to them. If nothing else, they also have election certificates, and their constituents can hold them accountable. But I do want to read for the record, if I may, Mr. President, the resolution that was passed in one of my cities, Minnetonka, that I represent, and on section 1.01, It reads, and I quote, "More than 24 bills have been introduced by the Minnesota legislature this session that would restrict local decision making. Section 1.02, and I quote, "Local elected officials are in the best position to determine what health, safety, and welfare regulations best serve their constituents." Section 1.03, and I quote, "Local elected officials, just like members of the Minnesota House and representatives of the Minnesota Senate, are held accountable through their state's robust election process." Section 1.04, and I quote, "Cities are often laboratories for ordinances at the local level are enacted only after a comprehensive, legal, and open process." Section 1.05, "Cities are often laboratories for determining public policy approaches to the challenges that face residents and businesses." Section 2, and this is the final thing that I will quote, 2.01, "By adopting this resolution, the council states it supports for local decision-making authority and opposition to legislation that removes that ability of local elected officials to respond to the needs of its constituents." I mentioned this one and I highlight this in particular because it is one of the cities that I represent. But I believe that's exactly what we should be doing as state legislators, listening to our constituents. And our constituents, in my opinion, are people. I certainly have businesses and very large and small businesses in my district, and I listen to them too. But I do believe that the closest level of government to the people is the local level, and I would think that they have a lot more to say and a lot more at stake than we do at the state level in terms of knowing what the real needs and the tools that they need to address those needs. So another thing I want to mention, and if Senator Miller, Mr. Chair, if Senator Miller can yield for a couple questions.
Senator Miller will yield. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. President. And Senator Miller, are you aware if the League of Minnesota Cities or the Municipal Legislative Commission, which represents the local level of government here in this debate, are they supportive of this bill?
Senator Miller.
Mr. President, Senator Franzen, I do not know.
Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Miller. And I've been taught in law school to never ask a question I do not know the answer to. So, as far as I know, they have the League of Minnesota Cities has no position on the bill, and usually that means that there is a divergence of opinions, and they can't make up their mind to certainly have one unique voice on a particular issue. So I'll take their no position as a position that's not supportive of this bill. That's my personal assumption, and having worked with those type of organizations. And then the Municipal Legislative Commission has been pushing for these resolutions to be voted on at the local level. So I would take that as to say that they are not in supportive of this bill. I would love to have a letter that I can give you with that statement, but the resolutions I think are much louder because they come from those individual cities. And again, talking to Senator Miller and Senator, Marty's position, the debate that really should be happening here at the state level is, are we in a position that we want to have a program for paid sick and family leave or minimum wage, and having those policy debates instead of preempting them with this bill? So I take that matter seriously. I think the conversation that's happening at those city council meetings are conversations that are not happening here, and that's why we have $15 in Minneapolis and a different proposal in St. Paul. If we really want to tackle those issues, and if we really don't believe that that's the way they should go, then we really should have the debate at the state level. So that is where we need to be focusing this discussion, and I do believe that we should be moving in that direction. As a mother of 2 young children, and as a small business owner, I do believe that we need to pay people what they deserve for the work that they do, and they need to have benefits that they are able to be productive citizens. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do that at the private level, at the private sector level, taxpayers are going to pick up the tab. And I believe that wholeheartedly. When we don't make those discussions and make those programs and services and policies in place at the state level, at the end of the day, we all pay. When people are going to work sick, when nurses don't have time to really get better and are back at the job, we all are unhealthier. So please, members, think about the real consequences of voting for this bill. I certainly am not putting my personal interest first. I am putting the interest of the people that I represent and the cities that have come to me to tell me that this is not the way we want to go. And I urge members to consider supporting a vote against this bill. Thank you.